We're getting back to Transformers Prime today with the episode +1, which begins immediately with Wheeljack getting a ground bridge back to base, where he whines a little bit. Because, this guy's just bound and determined to get me to stop liking him. This episode addresses his behavior in the last episode a little bit, but in ways that I do not consider to be adequate for the kinds of behaviors he was pulling off. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Primarily, though, this episode is about Nurse Darby and Agent Fowler going on a date to get a Predacon claw from a museum. Not literally, but it basically is, because by the end, they're on first name basis with each other and way more familiar with each other, even though we don't actually see when that happened. The implication being that they made out in Wheeljack's trunk, which is weird. I don't know how I feel about that. Nurse Darby and Optimus. Nurse Darby x Optimus for life. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. But yeah, they discover that this item is at a museum. Wheeljack's already left with RC to look for another Predacon artifact. Did I assume they do recover? They do recover that one, right? Did the episode confirm that they did? I don't even remember. It probably doesn't matter. But they got it. It was a spine. It looked pretty cool. And Fowler can throw around his weight as a federal agent to get the museum to hand the artifact over, so they don't figure they actually need any Transformers for it, or at least he doesn't. Everybody else is like, we should probably wait for Optimus to get back. But, Bill definitely feels like Optimus is a rival for June's affections. Because he is. Because she's been crushing on him super hard. Which is still the most hilarious thing in the entire show. By a wide margin. And so he insists that they can do it. Just the two of them together. And he does impress her by throwing his weight around as a federal agent to get that museum to turn over that artifact. Which we do not see at all. We don't see any part of their actual retrieval of the artifact. Which is actually a good thing, because that would have been super boring and taken up time for the rest of this episode, which has some of the best banter in it of the entire show. Because it turns out that Knockout is sent after the same Predacon fossil. So he shows up wanting the fossil, and he uses some kind of stun thing to knock June and Fowler out and put them in his trunk, literally kidnapping them. And I love... He tries to contact Megatron. Doesn't work, which, again, I'll talk about that in a second. He tries to contact Megatron, and the way he says it is just hilarious. He's like, I caught a couple of humans for you to use as hostages or experiments or whatever. And you can just tell he just doesn't care. He just thinks that Megatron will be happy. His first communique with Megatron, before he realizes the communications aren't getting through, is so flirty. He's clearly trying to pick up Megatron. And it's the funniest thing.
So go on, Big M. Tell me you love me more than Starscream. Mileage. Hello. Too familiar?
And then he starts bantering with June and Fowler. And, he can hear everything they're saying. And thinks they're a couple, and they deny it. And it's funny. They banter back. Knockout is just on his he's on his A game in this episode. He's a very charismatic and fun villain in general. But the writing for him was top notch in this episode, and the voice acting was great. He was just he was a car most of the episode, and he was still the most dynamic and fun character on the screen whenever he was on screen. So June and Fowler they play keep away with him for a while. They managed to get out by... They escape through the seat. Like, you know how they'll say if you're stuck in a car trunk, you can, like, push through the back seat? You would assume that wouldn't work in a Transformer, but it literally does. They managed to get through, and Fowler grabs Knockout's steering wheel and steers him, and then uses the brakes to stop him, and they run away. It's like, dude, like, I get that you're a car, but, like, I would imagine a Decepticon who chooses a car as their ult mode, like, the majority of them would have the foresight to, like, just make those parts of them cosmetic. And Knockout apparently wasn't smart enough to do that. They also get away from it at one point by pepper spraying him. Like, why did that work? But it did, and it was hilarious. And they play keep away with him for a while. And they get so close to getting the fossil away from him. But he manages to recover it. Using them as a distraction, because while all this has been going on, RC and Wheeljack have been doing their thing. They clobber some Decepticons, and they recover that other fossil, and they're talking. I guess I'll talk about this now. I was going to save it to the end, but I'll talk about this now, because it's not going to take too long. We don't go into specific detail about everything that Wheeljack's feeling, because most of it is a recap of the previous episode, and they like to save that for every single episode of One Piece. But you can tell he's been going over what happened, and RC's been, like, giving him advice and psychoanalyzing him. And she deduces that his issue isn't with Ultra Magnus, his issue is with Bulkhead, and he's projecting that in Ultra Magnus because Bulkhead, following Ultra Magnus' lead, makes it clear how much Bulkhead has changed from the old days of the Wreckers. And first of all, I don't agree with that. Like, that could be what they were going for, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like he genuinely resented Ultra Magnus's style of everything, really. And that was apart from his problem with Bulkhead, because remember, we talked about this in the previous review, Bulkhead left before Ultra Magnus ever came onto the Wreckers. So why would his feelings about Ultra Magnus have anything to do with his feelings for his feelings about Bulkhead changing as a person? Wouldn't he resent Optimus then, since Bulkhead chose Optimus over the Wreckers? That doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think it follows. I don't think it tracks from what we actually saw in the episode. But it comes down to she thinks he needs to make up with Bulkhead, because he'll feel even worse than he already does if he loses Bulkhead entirely. And sure, okay, that's fine. But please, will the show please address his stupid and reckless actions that almost get people killed all the time? Like, I'm glad that the character got some emotional development, because he's only a recurring, so, like, he needs as much as he can get whenever he's on screen, but, like, he's still stupid and reckless and probably should not be going on missions. At least he doesn't almost get RC killed today. Like, that's the real issue. That's what I want them to deal with. I want them to make it clear that his soloing behavior, his Leroy Jenkinsing, his that guying, isn't right. and make a story out of that. And, like, I literally just rewatched, like, recently, I went through and I watched these for my own enjoyment up until the end while I was doing other stuff, and I don't remember them doing that. Hopefully I'm misremembering. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I guess I like him a little bit better by the end of this episode, though, than I did by the end of the last one. Because he does, you know, take his foot out of his mouth and make up with Bulkhead. But I still don't feel like that's really what the issue is with this character. But anyway, they get called in by Jack, who has realized that something's up with June and Fowler, that they're in trouble. Because even though everyone else has kind of just assumed that they went out to dinner or something after their museum date, he actually takes initiative and ground bridges to the museum and finds Fowler's busted up cell phone and realizes something's wrong, because Jack is the only competent character in the show, I guess, when Optimus isn't here. And even sometimes when he is. So he calls them in, redirects them to recover June and Fowler, who are arguing over whether or not there was any point in going and getting the artifact in the first place, because if they had waited for Optimus, then Knockout would have just gotten it anyway, but now Knockout has them too, so that's the thing that was talked about. And yeah, objectively that's correct, that was June's point. But I still think they needed to try to recover it. I still think that was the right thing to do. My point being that this one offhanded conversation that these characters have while all this stuff with Knockout is going on has more nuance to it than everything with Wheeljack. Still, all of that was really fun. The RC and Wheeljack stuff had some good action, and there was even more good action when they showed up at the end. And like I mentioned before, the June and Fowler and Knockout stuff was really witty and hilarious. These three characters have such an interesting rapport with each other, especially considering that they never interact. This is basically a one-off, and it was glorious. The most interesting part of the episode, though, is something that the show has clearly been building up to for quite a long time, while they're hanging out on top of the Nemesis, because this is where they hang out now, I guess. Starscream pisses off Predaking, of course. And Predaking ends up destroying their communication satellite. And Megatron, even though he has a guy out in the field right now, and is already pissed at Starscream, is not told that communications are down. Starscream decides not to tell him communications are down and try to fix the satellite before he tells him. If Megatron had known that he was out of communication with Knockout, he probably would have sent some Seekers or some Insecticons to make sure Knockout was okay, to intercept him and make sure he was okay and escort him back, since they don't know whether or not he has the fossil yet to send him a ground bridge, if they even can without that satellite, because we don't know what all that's tied into, right? And straight up, the fact that Starscream pissed off the dragon again and got communications knocked out is literally the only reason that June and Fowler have any chance to try to steal the artifact back from him in the first place. Which, at this point, Megatron, dude, just shoot Starscream. I know he's simping for you real hard lately, but just get rid of him, man. He's doing more harm than good by, a pretty significant margin at this point. Just get rid of the guy. It's so dumb. Back when Starscream first showed up and was, groveling real hard, I can understand why Megatron would let him back in the fold, but he's proven not to be of any quantifiable use. Throw him out. I don't know, I don't get it. It's silly, but it's funny. He's helping the Autobots almost as much as any of the Autobots are helping the Autobots at this point. Absolutely hysterical. But again, that's not the best part of this. The best part of this is that as repairs are being made and the various characters are interacting with the computer interface tied into this satellite, Predaking is watching. And then at the end of the episode, we see him, while no one else is around, using it to access the computer records and learn about his people. And proving what we've all known, that he does have intelligence and he's pretty clever. He understands that he doesn't know as much as these people around him, so he's taking the time to learn what he needs to learn to really be at his best when he finally reveals himself to them. It's cool. It's very, very cool. The entire episode was pretty cool. Getting to see human characters, even aside from the human characters that we usually get to occasionally see do things, was very neat. And while I definitely ship June with Optimus way more than I do with Fowler, I have to admit, they do have a pretty cool dynamic. So I can see why others would prefer it. Also because they're both humans, and so it just makes more sense, but that's not what shipping's about. Come on, guys. Seriously. What are you even talking about? End of the day, this isn't a great episode. Like, a lot of the stuff that happens in this episode is technically the same kind of stuff that's happened 1,000 times before. But between Knockout just being the funniest freaking character in the show by a wide margin through the entire course of this episode, and the unique quirks of the dynamics here, the unique specifics of the situations, and that really cool stuff with Predaking at the end, this one stands out despite telling the same kind of story that we have seen in this show before. It's an episode that follows a very Transformers Prime formula while still managing to feel special as an episode of Transformers Prime. And I really appreciate it for that. All that said though, guys, what do you think of the Transformers Prime episode +1 if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else that think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias as well as many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description, but either way, this has been AJ22 and I will talk to you guys later.